Learn how to take your caring and giving farther with the Caring and Funding Podcast, powered by CAF America. CAF America, America's leader in cross-border philanthropy, helps corporations, foundations, wealth advisors, and individuals donate to charities around the world, ensuring that gifts are made safely, legally, and with the greatest impact. Now, the host of CAF America's Caring and Funding Podcast, CAF America President and CEO, Ted Hart.
Our topic today is crowdfunding, a very important phenomenon of online fundraising. Going back with a little bit of history here, the earliest examples of crowdfunding online date back to 1997. As crowdfunding passes its 20th anniversary, we here at CAF America want to give guidance on how to successfully use crowdfunding platforms for charitable giving. It's estimated that there are over 2,000 crowdfunding sites online, and by 2025, it's predicted that more than $1 trillion will be raised online using crowdfunding techniques. While such campaigns often use the word contribution or donation or gift in its pitch to the public, the question is, what makes a campaign truly charitable? How does it qualify for tax receipting? And if funds are being moved outside the United States, how do you meet regulatory compliance requirements both in the United States and in the country to which the funds are being sent? My guest today to help us sort through all of these topics and questions is Jessie Krafft, Vice President of Donor Advice and Grant Services at CAF America. First of all, what is crowdfunding and how does it intersect with philanthropic giving? And is there a distinction between these two things?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's typically a distinction, but not always. There can be certainly a merge between the two as well. So there has been a recent surge in fundraising from the public for a variety of different causes through sites such as GoFundMe and a variety of other platforms that are popping up out there. Some of these sites aim, and the fundraisers aim to raise funds for a person, potentially an individual that has an illness or that needs some sort of support because of potentially funeral costs or other variety of things that we've seen out there. Or there are other ways that these crowdfunding sites can actually be used to support things like kickstarting campaigns for profit activities or even charitable activities. So actually supporting charitable projects at a charitable organization. There's kind of a variety of different buckets that this type of funding could go into for different causes. And so there's certainly a distinction there between what is actually charitable or an exempt purpose as defined by the IRS, and then what would be considered more of an investment in the case of like those Kickstarter campaigns, or just a gift to an individual, which may feel charitable and you could consider it as a piece of your philanthropy, but it wouldn't be tax deductible necessarily. In most cases, it wouldn't be. So you could consider it in your philanthropy bucket, but you couldn't consider it that way on your tax deductions when you're filing with the IRS. It's important to understand when you're giving to these various crowdfunding campaigns, what you're actually giving to, and to do your due diligence to make sure it is tax deductible if that is your intent.
One of the reasons for that is that there are, as we said at the top of the show, more than 2,000 crowdfunding sites online. So as you just mentioned, crowdfunding it's often informal. It's often family and friends and colleagues coming together, which is the very essence of what crowdfunding is. Why does this not satisfy the IRS definition of charitable giving if people are coming together and the intent is that it go to charitable works?
The IRS has set forth a very specific process for determining whether an activity or an organization is charitable and is tax exempt. Of course, an organization that hopes to receive tax-deductible gifts from their donors would have to apply to the IRS to become a 501c3 public charity. In the eyes of the IRS, any gifts that are given to individuals or entities or organizations that do not have this tax-exempt status that has been granted by the IRS would not be considered tax-deductible for their purposes.
The issue is that each and every donor to that campaign would not, in that instance, qualify for a tax receipt, but the person who collected the money and then wrote the check to the charity, they could then be received.
Yes, that's exactly right. And unfortunately, we do run into this as CAF America, as a charity. We have this happen every once in a while where a donor comes to us and, of course, has the best intentions and says, we ran this great GoFundMe campaign. We raised all of this money. And now I need you to provide tax receipts to all of these individuals. And I'm sending you this one check from my personal account that aggregates everything that I collected. Unfortunately, in that case, because all of these situations, we're not aware of it in the beginning, so we can't make sure that the money is coming directly to us, that it is tax deductible and everything like that. In those cases, we're not actually able to provide tax receipts. Even though we are a 501c3 and this money is coming to us, we can't provide tax receipts to all of those individual donors that might have given to that campaign.
It's not possible to receipt each and every one of those donors because, in fact, legally, they made the contribution to you personally, and then you, hopefully being an honest person, then wrote the check to the charity. Therefore, you are, in fact, the only donor of those funds.
That's right. Like I said, it's barely ever the case that we've run into, at least, where this individual has bad intentions or knows this going into it. It's really just the lack of education, which is why we're talking about this today.
We wanted to make sure that we share a step-by-step process for our listeners today, whether they be a charity looking to fundraise or an individual who's looking to fundraise. How can they utilize the services of their favorite crowdfunding site and be able to tax receipt each donor and be able to make that donation to their favorite charity?
There are a couple things here. If you're an individual, and let's say there are a lot of cases where an individual is fundraising for a run or a bike ride or things like that they're participating in, and they're trying to fundraise from all of their friends. It's really important if you're doing something like that you coordinate with the people that are actually running that event, or even if you're just fundraising for a particular project at an organization, you need to coordinate with the charity themselves that you're hoping to receive the funds to make sure that whatever site you use, perhaps they already have a site set up for you that you should be using, or that if they're allowing you, and they might not, but if they're allowing you to find your own fundraising site, that they can coordinate directly with those that manage that crowdfunding site to make sure that, one, the money is coming directly to the charity. The money has to be sent directly to that charity for it to be considered tax deductible. And that the language that you're using on the page is consistent with what the charity would accept on their own fundraising pages, and perhaps including things like their EIN and items like that to ensure that there's transparency and that the donors understand where their money is going. Additionally, a lot of times the charity will work with that crowdfunding site to provide a way for an automated tax receipt to go through so that the donor is receiving that acknowledgement. And you just have to make sure that all of those, and those are just a few of the steps, but those pieces are followed in order for it to be considered tax deductible. Really, the most important point is don't do this on your own. You have to collaborate with that charitable entity themselves in order to make sure this is done correctly.
What if you're a donor who's invited to participate in a crowdfunding campaign, of which millions of people participate, and they come to the campaign site and tug at the heartstrings, or certainly a compelling mission that they want to support? How would I know as a donor that this has been set up appropriately?
That's a good question. It depends on the site. There are some crowdfunding sites that have now caught on to the fact that donors are having trouble making this distinction. There are some crowdfunding sites that have certified charitable pages where there's some sort of badge or check mark or a different URL that is separating those into a different category. If they can guarantee that a tax receipt will come from it and that it is a tax deductible donation, it should be obvious to the donors of whether that's the case. But in others, they might not have that type of functionality. And so you really need to read the fine print, see if there is an EIN present.
Just for our listeners, make sure know what is an EIN?
Yes, it's an employer identification number, and this is a number that's used by the IRS. It's essentially your tax registration ID as an organization. The EIN that's given to 501c3s, which are charitable organizations that would be tax deductible, can be verified on the IRS website. As a donor, I know that if I'm giving to a 501c3, I always pull that EIN and make sure I'm doing my due diligence to make sure that is actually a tax-exempt entity before I give to them. That would be a piece of it, but of course, anyone could put an EIN anywhere. I think you need to go a bit further than that. If it's not clear in the language on the page, you might want to talk to the organizer of the campaign to see who the funds are actually going to, and just making some inquiries based on that if you're not seeing the information that clearly distinguishes it as a tax-exempt organization and as a tax-deductible gift on the site.
In asking that question, you may actually be prompting the person who has goodwill and good intentions to think through some things that maybe they were unaware of.
Right, because it might help them realize that they need to go a bit further to make sure that their donors are receiving their proper tax benefits from their generous gifts.
All of this advice that we've given so far is apropos to every single crowdfunding site, every single donor who may want to make sure that, first of all, the money is going directly to a charity. What if the charity that I want to support is outside of the United States?
If you're an individual that wants to give to a foreign charity through one of these sites, you're of course not going to be looking to see if they're registered on the IRS database because, of course, in most cases they will not be. There's a small subset of actual foreign-based organizations. We're not talking about friends of organizations or things like that, but foreign-based organizations that have 501c3 status, but it's a very small subset. In this case, you should really make that assumption that if it is based in a foreign country, that it is not automatically tax deductible. But instead, there are, of course, like CAF America, intermediary organizations that can act as the 501c3 that is working in cooperation with that foreign organization to send them tax deductible gifts. In that case, essentially, the donors are still giving if the foreign charity has developed a relationship with a 501c3 organization or intermediary that is assisting them in the U.S. Essentially, that the donors to that organization would be actually legally giving to the U.S. 501c3, and then that 501c3, such as CAF America, would undertake all of the proper IRS regulatory compliance checks to ensure that we can give those funds to that organization in a tax-exempt way. And there's, of course, a whole process around that. But for the donors that want to give to foreign organizations, you should make sure that they have, if you want it to be tax deductible, make sure that there is a 501c3 partnership in place. Otherwise, it will not be tax deductible to you. And then on the other side, if you are a foreign charity that does not have 501c3 status and you wish to fundraise in the United States, you will need to seek out a partnership with a 501c3, or some opt to actually register as a 501c3 themselves. That requires a lot more effort and financial input. What you would be doing in that case is very similar to an individual donor who wants to do a crowdfunding project on one of these sites. You would need to work directly with that 501c3 partner. So the foreign charity needs to work closely with the 501c3 to make sure that, again, all of that language on the site is clear, that the money is going directly to the 501c3 and not to the foreign charity, and that the tax receipt, we're able to tax receipt through the site, and other factors like that before you start that funding campaign. Like I said, we've had individuals come to us that have done these campaigns without our knowledge. We've also had charities that come to us after the fact and say, oh, well, we raised all of this money and we have it. Can you send a tax receipt? But of course, the money never came to us and we weren't aware of this fundraiser going on. We're not able then to tax receipt. And so they're in a position where they're having to tell their donors that it actually wasn't tax deductible, which is not a good position to be in. On both sides, it definitely requires close coordination with the charity that you're hoping will tax receipt for that donation.
There's a very specific process that has to be followed, but the bottom line is crowdfunding is possible. It's possible to give directly to charities, to be tax receipted for charities. It's also possible to support domestic charities or international charities, but there's a step-by-step process that needs to be followed. So buyer beware. Don't assume that every time you see the word donation, charitable, gift, that you actually are making a contribution to a charity or that you will be eligible for a tax receipt.
That's right. And I don't want us to come off as advocating not to give to projects and campaigns that are going to individuals with illnesses or things like that. It's just vetting is necessary. And just you go into it knowing that it is not tax deductible if that money is going directly to an individual or a family in need.
But the reality is that, as you said, we want all of our listeners to understand that crowdfunding sites are very helpful, can be very helpful, and can be used.
We certainly have many successful crowdfunding campaigns going on at any given time with a variety of different sites.
Ultimately, CAF America is here to make sure that the risk is managed, the regulations are followed, and that reputations are protected, and that is our pledge here at CAF America. Jessie, thank you so much for being my guest here on this show. I think a very important topic, and certainly as we started the show, a timely topic because there are so many crowdfunding sites, and in fact, it is expected to continue to grow and raise a great deal of money. Thank you again for being my guest here.
You've been listening to the Caring and Funding Podcast, powered by CAF America. You can find all of our podcasts at cafamerica.org, on iTunes, and on TuneIn. You can even say, Alexa, play CAF America on TuneIn. Thanks for listening.